Rodia had an encounter with the Time Ripper, and she wasn't prepared for him. Thankfully, not that much happened to her. Unfortunately, the Time Ripper is still around. Dante noted that Rodia was usually always the one to lift the team's mood when it's down. But this time, she wasn't. It had grown increasingly awkward and cold. They were almost starting to feel a chill at their fingers. Well, it's what happens when Rodia was in a depressive mood. If they were back at the bus, or if Yisang or Gregor was there, they'd at least try to do something to break the ice. But Ryushu, the psychotic Blood Knight, and Honglu, the ignorant dandy, were ill-equipped to help her. Nor were they affected by such a frosty mood. They just continued with the investigation. Dante observed that the Time Ripper had attacked the Eurodivia captain in the middle of something. Ryushu observed that he knew the Time Ripper. Dante asked how she could tell. Ryushu could tell by looking at his eyes, asking if it was obvious. It was the kind of look that people had in their eyes when getting killed by a rat that they knew. Dante corrected her by pointing out that that he's not dead. Honglu noted that the dead body looks different to the last one. Dante again said that he's not dead. Honglu saw that the Time Ripper tore the scarf in half, asking if he disagreed with his fashion choices. No, it's not that, Honglu. Rodia, having been with the Eurodivia for a notable amount of time, told them that they must live like fools in the eyes of others, so that they maybe see a path invisible to them. Dante was surprised by Rodia's statement. She continued by saying that it's what Sonia once said. A scarf was a yoke to hide the great ambition, that those of dreams must remain bound. The assistant didn't see her wearing that scarf. Rodia claimed that it cramped her style. Honglu saw that the act of chopping the scarf in half could mean that the Time Ripper might be a former Eurodivia member. They needed to head back to the hideout and ask around. Back at the Eurodivia hideout, they informed one of the captain's subordinates that the Time Ripper got their boss. Then they remembered the question, asking if any of them quit recently. The subordinate said, not formally, but one went completely off the grid, someone wanting to steal the surplus time there is and share it equally among everyone. He said that when his brother died, he became a bit weird, which is hardly surprising as personal loss can do that. Rodia asked if any wanted to go along with that plan. Some wanted to, but they didn't put that desire into action. Shouldn't, rather. They're the Eurodivia. They needed to hide or rather bide their time until Sonia gives them the word. Rodia asked if it was so. Then Ryushu asked where the Time Ripper was. The Eurodivia didn't know. Last time he heard anything from him, he said, I'll always be watching you. Creepy as it was. It means that he stood in the nest of District 20. He then asked if the captain will be back to normal. Well, eventually he will. It'll just take a while for the temporal stasis to wear off. Sometime later in the dark alleyway, Dante thought about those words. Ryushu found that briefly funny, saying one word: clock. Ryushu always used a death stick after a kill. Dante pointed out that she's always smoking. Ryushu said that it takes approximately 4 minutes for it to burn all the way through, much as the light of life slowly burns out of their dying eyes. It enhances the flavour of the nicotine. Clearly vapes were lost to history in that universe. 4 minutes have passed, but only 2 minutes have passed on the clock tower. Roger didn't see this as making sense, asking how none noticed that the clock tower was broken. Ryushu didn't see this as a new development. From the moments that they played detective, she noticed this each time she got her hit of nicotine. The assistant reminded them that they didn't look up a lot, because they learned to be helpless. Then we're reminded of Mr. Narcissism himself, Bumble, who complained of something not being finished, asking how much of a pain it was to wait for something, but also have too much time in a day, seeing it as so tedious. Then the Class 2 collection staff seeing it as a bother to stand guard there. All that stop and search. She saw it as so tedious. Roger asked the assistant what were the first 2 victims doing when the Time Ripper targeted them. The assistant mentioned that one of them was purchasing a 13-flavoured lollipop, and the other was reading a comic book starring a T-Corp inventor as a protagonist. Seeing it is pretty fun. Well, you can tell much about a culture by looking at how it's entertained. And in this case, there's precious little entertainment to begin with, as not a lot have enough time to look into entertainment. Roger asked if there was a lot of clock towers in the nest of District 20. The assistant told her that a total of 12 existed, but only 1 in that general area. She then asked if the Time Ripper struck only near that clock tower. The assistant confirmed this. Roger asked if they slowed the clock tower and made everyone in the area feel that sense of extreme tedium. The assistant then realised that the Time Ripper could only rip time from people that were bored. In that case, it's fortunate they don't have cricket in the city. Now that's a sport that would result in a whole stadium of time-frozen people. Ryushu noted that the clock tower, it would give her a nice view to blow smoke at. The assistant then pointed out that they need actual evidence to make an arrest. This surprised Roger. The assistant then added that they have to catch him in the act. They can't arrest people just because they feel like it. Roger asked if they should just let him attack them, just to catch him in the act, reminding him that he can rip time out of them. One small mistake and the assistant might wake up weeks, months, or even years later. They don't even know if Dante can rewind that. The assistant saw this as tragic, but it's still a part of their responsibilities. Roger asked if he even cared about catching the culprit, or is learning how to rip time all he cares about. The assistant once thought that he knew how it all worked, and He knew the mechanisms of every machine in existence within that nest. He didn't want that invention to be claimed by the T-Core Patents Agency. He wanted to watch it spread throughout the city. It's when he didn't try hard to stop him as he escaped through the back streets, and not out of laziness, so no. He just doesn't care how to time rip. It was like the case with the League of Nine. He was just curious about the exact mechanism behind the time ripping. It's an inventor's nature. Ryushu agreed. Rodio was frustrated by the fact that she can't get anything done with people like them. Then Honglu asked the assistant. Yes, he had something to ask him. When the Sol stood on the temporal scale gallows, didn't the machine beep loudly? The assistant confirmed this. Honglu then asked why it malfunctioned. The assistant knew why that happened. Honglu asked why the gallows was unable to take 10 billion arms worth of time from their soul, asking if it was broken. The assistant didn't think so. It was impossible for machines of his design to have any faults, usually. Honglu deduced that the source of the error was with the damned dozen, not the machine. Dante didn't understand what he meant. The assistant saw that they looked like, a part of the detective now. They were also acting like ones as well. Honglu mentioned that it was in Agatha's book. One of the qualities of an ace detective is the mind of bottomless inquisitiveness. Dante knew that to get rid of the time tax that they had was to catch the Time Ripper. Then the Class 5 auditor was speaking to address their concerns. Who told them that he's willing to work with them. He devised a plan for them, which was somewhat simple. He then explained it to them. Dante asked if whatever plan they had would really work. It's barely a plan, more like something that they came up within the last 10 minutes. Ryushu considered this to be annoying. Then Roger told them to hide. The Time Ripper was there. They were in the clock tower. And then Honglu was being overly friendly towards him, telling him that he's been waiting for him. Dante didn't know what to say about that, and Rodia was bemused by Honglu being that friendly towards the Time Ripper. The Time Ripper found it interesting. He knew that he would come there, and he had the manners to extend his greetings. Well, his background made it clear that rudeness is frowned upon. Then the Time Ripper realized that he's been tailing him that whole time. Honglu told him that he was right. He was hidden in plain sight, seeing him as one of the fools trying to pass themselves off as detectives. Killing time. Honglu again told him that he was right, asking him if he could teach him how to make the most of his time. The Time Ripper demanded that he give them his time, and he might tell him. One of the personalities didn't think 30 hours was enough, seeing it as a bloody joke, saying that they've lost hours fleeing from those zods, when they could have spent that time ripping more hours from others. 300 hours is seen as only fair. Another agreed, seeing him as one of the nest lackeys. The filthy watch chains of T-Core, seeing that he deserves it. If allowed to leave, he'd bring back more trouble. Wanting to make an example of him, another agreed, wanting him to try and extract the exact amount of hours, evenly split between 12. Another said, sod it, wanting him rather wanting them to stab as deep as they can go, not wanting to make the same mistake as that fat cat Bumble. A gash of 100 hours is too lenient. The core personality told them to shut it. He'd decide the time. They'd stab as deep as they can and rip 1,000 hours from him. Which should be more than enough. A little over 41 days. Another said that they'd be losing their sense of taste for that time if they divide that among each other, but they could accept that. It was clear to Dante that there was multiple personalities in there. The strange behaviour wasn't just displayed by the Time Ripper. It was Honglu as well. His tranquil look was that of one that was ready to let something go or feel liberated. Who then asked the Time Ripper if those hours would pass in a fraction of a second. He said yes. There would be no physical pain, but the despair would await him upon awakening. Honglu told him that he liked that. Ooh, I didn't know his family was that dysfunctional. That he felt that, well, like letting everything go. Telling him to rip his time away. Dante didn't think he meant that. Roger even asked that. Ryushu saw that he used a time-tearing razor. The assistant saw this as the core of the power that extracts time. It's no invention. It's the power of that distortion. Powers beyond reason. The Time Ripper struck, and after a lengthy silence, it was as if time was frozen. We found out that the Time Ripper failed. Honglu's time can't be ripped away. Honglu considered this according to plan, much to his disappointment. He blinked, but the world was the same as before. One of the personalities was confused how this was possible. Another realized that they walked right into a trap. Ryushu told the detectives to AOTS. Attack our target situation? Dante was relieved that the Time Ripper failed. 30 minutes previously, the assistant told them that the temporal scale gallows wasn't broken. The error was caused by them. The damned dozen's time was already bound to someone else's. Dante's. And they weren't sure what he meant. The assistant explained that Dante caused a multi-reference error in it, so their time couldn't be hung. Radia understood this, as they were living within Dante's time, so the gallows couldn't hang theirs. Well, Dante didn't see this coming. Honglu noted that if they weren't aware of that, the Time Ripper is unlikely to know this either. So once he tries to rip away time from him, that's when Radia and Ryushu can leap into action and arrest the Time Ripper. Which, as Dante pointed out, was how the trap came to be. But Dante asked, what if Honglu manages to have his time ripped away? Honglu was unconcerned, seeing this as all going to be okay. For some reason, I'm thinking of shooting at Eric Idle with a shotgun for writing that song that's a mix of happy and blissful ignorance of the nightmare of reality, and toxic positivity that was an attempt of creating an illusion that everything is fine, that is, always look on the bright side of life. That's a song that can generate a feeling of rage in me. Not as much as anything by ABBA, but still quite strong. The assistant wondered how long this would last once the news of the malfunctioning clock tower breaks. It would crumble the trust in the institution of the supposedly unerring clock tower. Seeing this as a fun show. Dante would try their best not to malfunction. The assistant told Participation Trophy that he used to hate the sound of clocks. He didn't know how it started, but He considered that sound as something he'd associate with the perpetual cycle of pain, like a premonition that a clock hand-shaped blade would one day cleave clean through him. A blade of time. Their noise was different. It's one that makes them dream up something different that's not pain. He extended his gratitude to Dante. Dante wasn't sure what it was for, but they asked something to do for them in return, which Honglu translated, and the assistant listened. Dante knew that a big fight was about to break out, so they'll need the others to join this fight. Then at the clock tower before the Time Ripper came back, Ishmael complained that they were kept imprisoned that whole time, only to let them out right before they catch the culprits, asking Dante if it was nice to adventure with just the three of them. Well, the tastic 4 was just as dysfunctional. Ultis asked if Dante had learned their lesson that her absence was deeply felt. Sinclair was complaining about the aches from just sitting inside that cell, not wanting to go back to a place like that. Heathcliff asked if that sword was the Time Ripper. Faust confirmed this as a distortion that they must defeat. Back in the present, the battle began. The Time Ripper was a slasher, as in slashed the enemy that was before him, and was capable of making the enemy bleed. Well, he was certainly capable of bleeding more than a clock. Yes, they were bleeding the HP of those that they were able to hit. And he could also use the stolen time he had to hit stronger, and even inflict more bleed. While slashing attacks, along with lust and to a less extent pride, are what he's strong against, he's weakest to piercing attacks, along with wrath, sloth, and gluttony. After fighting off the Time Ripper, he asked, have they ever wept in such deep longing for that extra minute, that extra second that they let slip through their fingers, where they wished that their heart would sleep forever, for every beat was a painful reminder of that merciless march of time? He doesn't think so, as they had plenty of time to spare. Then the Time Ripper slipped into a shimmering portal. Massault knew that this was a mirror dungeon of the Fathoms, not the first that they've encountered. Rodia was hesitant, but she had to ask Dante. It had just occurred to her, asking where does all the time that they use, as in both Dante and the Damned Dozen, where does it come from? Dante didn't know where that time that they used to rewind came from. All they knew was that the clock turned and the rewind happened. Ryushu said WC, and that's not another way of saying toilets. That's her saying, who cares? And Rodia agreed with this. Dante couldn't answer her, and not because they're unwilling. It wasn't questioned farther than that, after Ryushu shut that down. Urtis then pointed out that they needed to head into the mirror dungeon of the Fathoms, and they all did so. Inside the mirror dungeon of the Fathoms, that is linked to the Time Ripper, Dante observed their surroundings. Then we heard the voice of the Time Ripper's past, where we heard the words 21 minutes. the time it took for someone to hit the cobblestones, which turned out to be the Time Ripper's younger brother, who in the past told the one that would become the Time Ripper if it was about time he quit the Eredivisie. They barely have enough time to scrape by, wasting time building unregistered inventions just to annoy time collectors, which doesn't do anything, asking him to dream like he used to. He always wanted to work for the T-Corp Patents Agency. He's basically urging him to sell out. The Time Ripper was saying that they were only biding their time, waiting for the right moment, and when that moment came, his younger brother didn't even know when that moment would be. What if it comes after they're dead? Would any of it matter if they're not there to see it? Oh yes, too much patience won't get them anywhere. Telling his brother to take the Grade 1 Inventor Certificate exam, make a submission to the Inventions Expo, telling him to think of the prize money for receiving the Inventor of the Year award. He wasn't sure what to think of that. His younger brother asked if he knew that in other nests, everyone enjoys an equal 24 hours. Yeah, that's because time in those nests isn't monetized. Of course they'd be amazed by that. They wouldn't know any better. And that's not even considering that they also have a full spectrum of colours. Yes. A full spectrum of colours without paying for the privilege. He then asked him to imagine for a second, what if they saved up a ton of money and moved to a different nest? They'd be able to live 24 hours a day as well. He could get a full night's rest and still have half a day to spend. The Time Ripper was always full of excuses. For all his hatred of the system, he was inert, with his ignorance as a convenient shield and excuse for inaction. He knew that their lives would get better if he did get certified. But he always had the same excuse. I don't have the time to take the test. But one morning, his younger brother, he spoke to him, saying that he'd lend all but 2 hours of his time, which was more than enough time to complete the exam. Yes, that is a practical problem with taking an exam, as it would take time to go to where it was held, and also to complete it. It would end around 2 PM, and he'd meet him in front of the clock tower. He can give back the time he borrowed there. The Time Ripper was given a single day of abundance. The sun still hadn't set when he finished the exam. He had a good feeling about this. He believed that he could start dreaming again, just like in that old comic book that he used to read, to dream about becoming a professional inventor. Then a car rolled in slowly. It was so slow that anyone could step out of the way. The driver was like them, someone living 10-hour days. Unfortunately, his brother could not, because he didn't have enough time. His hours were stretched enough as it was. They were stretched even farther now, going from less than 50% normal speed to 8.33% normal speed. His brother was slowly, so slowly, thrown into the air. The one that would become the Time Ripper ran as fast as he could within the time that was given to him, but he was unsuccessful at reaching him. He never could have done that. Nothing changed, no matter how much time was shared, because his life was spent in a rush. because its entirety slipped through his fingers in a blink of an eye. He wandered aimlessly near the street that his brother drew his last breath. A candy-sucking T-Corp citizen wished that they could taste every flavor of that lollipop sooner. A listless T-Corp citizen couldn't wait to read what happens next, wanting someone to know them. Well, to let them know when it's out, and wake them up later, when the next volume of that comic book was out. Ah yes, the first two victims. The Time Ripper lamented the city's state of affairs, certainly in District 20. Then we see Bumble, the narcissistic third victim, who couldn't wait for them to complete his portrait, hoping that they captured the little upward flick at the tip of his mustache. It's supposed to look like a bird's wings. Seeing it is so tedious, waiting for it to be finished. Just when I thought that he couldn't be any more disgusting. He has a severe case of terminal vanity. Nah, that's too kind to describe him. Then we see the Class 2 collection staff. She was bored, seeing it as free in the afternoon, a long shift that was tedious, asking when it would end. The Time Ripper had too many people who were indifferent when it comes to killing time. Even the Eurodivier captain of District 20 saying that their time would come, just like Saint Sonia would say. Understanding the tedium, everyone felt the same way, telling him to stop pestering him about it, asking if he thinks that he's happy with the small-time stuff. He's just as tired as the Time Ripper regarding punching the collectors and running away. The Time Ripper was ignorant. He lacked the time. If only he had the time that they killed, or even his younger brother had the time that they killed, he would still be alive. Believing that his brother was right, that he couldn't wait for the moment that wouldn't come, he decided to take action himself, annoyed by how many were content to kill their time, and he likely distorted sometime after his brother was run over. It's unclear when this happened, but it was definitely sometime after, as he still looked human before that. Then the Time Ripper spoke of how clock might look like it actually turns evenly on the outside, or rather how a clock does this. The cogs that make up the clockwork within each turn at disparate rates. Some live 44-hour days, some live 4-hour days. They, as in those within the Time Ripper, are not like the Eurodivier. They know that they must take direct action. Rodia wasn't so sure about that, as she knew what could happen when taking action. When she killed the collector of protection money affiliated with the Middle in District 25. Yes, she meant well, as it fed many for a few days, but in the end it caused more harm than good, when the Middle decided to deliver a mass punishment killing. Heathcliff understood it's what he turned himself into, a representation of how he sees what the world should be, which hints that what they did and who they are can influence the distortion form. Heathcliff knew this as both he and Hindley had similar distortion forms, lupine forms, due to seeing themselves as beasts that aren't worth much. For different reasons. With the Time Ripper, it was his time with the Eurodivier that influenced his distortion form. The Time Ripper saw that within him was a place where all may live in equal hours. Their nest, a place for all who have felt the same pain. Massault didn't see this as justifying his time killing. The Time Ripper denied that he was the time killer. It was the people of the city who have been slaughtering time. None took a moment to doubt that the clock tower may have been broken. Instead, they merely complained that it was a slow day and that they should pass the time. Killing time. He saved the dying times from their wasteful clutches, asking them if they still claim that he's wrong. So basically he's targeting the members of Time Incorporated, those that away time into an empty abyss. They then pursued the Time Ripper through a place that resembles a street in the nest run by T-Corp. There was echoes of people that they passed by, with a glowing vending machine nearby. It was glowing purple, making it stand out in the streets that was completely devoid of any colour. This light was followed. They were that close to unveiling the truth of the time-killing time. They didn't know how this case would end. They decided to forge on regardless. They gained 600 costs to use at said vending machine. After that, they fought the recently fought opponents, a mix of Eredivier and T-Corp collectors. On the way, there was a number of other encounters. In a secret hideout of the Eredivier, one of them was reciting texts given to them by Saint Sonia. Part of those texts was that they have become nothing but cogs in a machine that exists solely for the industrialists, the bourgeoisie, and the wings. What else when other human relation remains among the citizens but the narrow self-interest and heartless bonds created by capital? Thus, we shall cast aside the cold, unfeeling metal we call coin. Instead, we shall trade the warmth with one another based on our needs. To the haves, the laws of the nest are those that should protect their privileges. Yet to the have-nots, they are chains that shackle us. Then we shall defy the laws of the nest. They shall be shown the wrath of the have-nots. All that the Eredivier had to lose was their chains. All they had to gain was a world without hunger. The Eredivier suddenly pointed in their direction. One of the damned dozen had to say something. If the Chosen shouted out, "The Eredivier of the city, unite!" a check occurred. If successful, the Eredivier shouted out, "Unite!" He also produced a few bottles of stolen liquor from the rich and poured it over a pile of chalices, all the while shouting the chant. Alcohol was overflowing the uppermost chalice, filling the other chalices below. This granted the Ijo gift, Chalice of Trickle Down, where attack skills that inflicted tremor, that win a clash would inflict 2 more tremor and 2 more counts of tremor. And if the identity that used this was a Eredivier, this would increase to 3 potency and 3 counts. If the check failed, the shouted slogan would be awkwardly spoken, and this looked suspicious, and the Chosen made a pathetic excuse and left the hideouts. Nothing happened after that. However, if told that it was a good idea, but it's unlikely to be implemented properly, the atmosphere would become as cold as a prison. The leader of that group would point to the door and gesture them to leave. nothing happened after that. Yeah, with groups with extreme points of view, doubt and questioning authority is not something that can be tolerated, both in our world and in that one. Clearly, Das Kapital by Karl Marx was either lost, destroyed, or put on a blacklist, as what was spoken during that meeting was awfully similar to his teachings. Well, if there's a need for that kind of ideology, someone will come up with it, which is what Saint Sonia apparently did. Let's hope that he doesn't get drunk with power, as that's what a lot of those that embraced communism did, and ended up creating dictatorships, the kind that would replace one kind of oppression with another. Regardless, it doesn't look like they're ready to take that kind of action yet, rising up against an oppressive regime that was already there. Another encounter was on the streets, where a citizen was being confronted by a collection staff member who was collecting taxes from them, asking if they were paying in time or in cash. The citizen told him that he had already paid his time in full. His time taxes, to be more precise, seeing 300 million Arn as ridiculous. According to records, the citizen incurred additional time tax responsibilities due to a donation gift tax. So no good deed ever goes unpunished. The citizen asked if it was because he gave away his time to children in the back streets. He gave them 300 hours, failing to see how that resulted in 300 million Arn in taxes. The collection staff told him that tax calculation in T-Corp was always exceptionally accurate. Is that so, or is that just what you want everyone to think? The time collector strode towards the citizen to neutralize them. If one of the sinners decided to talk to them, a check was needed. If passed, the chosen claimed that there's something wrong with their calculation. The others chimed in to say that they should probably get the amount nullified. One of them noted that, conveniently, there's a collections office nearby. A nearby crowd began to grow around this, and the time collector eventually gave in. They noted that the damned dozen weren't carrying a timepiece, advising them to stay out of trouble. Clearly, this obstruction was annoying them. The time collector grumbled about something and left, but not before taping something to the chosen's clothes, the warning notice EGO, which inflicts one bind to the fastest enemy or abnormality pass next turn. However, it becomes 2 bind if the target has tremor, and if the target is with a bind when attacked, this would result in additional damage, 5 plus 2.5 times the bind value, up to 15% more. So Sank Don Quixote would help with that one. If the check fails, the same happened, but the collection staff he also noted that the chosen didn't have a watch and decided to collect the dues of the corresponding sinner, resulting in 5 SP damage and 50 costs being lost. If if they decided to just walk away and not get involved, it would accomplish nothing, but by the time they considered helping them, the citizen had lost their time and was slowly moving away due to losing quite a bit of time. And likely moving at a 4-hour day for the foreseeable future. Then they headed to a watch factory. It was busy. The factory owner was shouting at his employees. The owner glared at one of his employees and screamed in anger. The employee was occupied with his work. He wanted to say something, but it took a while to open his mouth. The owner pulled out a recorder in a frustrated attempt to communicate, due to their different timescales. But it didn't help, as the owner told him that he checked the security camera. He was napping for 2 whole hours, demanding that he explain himself. The worker said, "Fucked," slowly. The owner asked if he can speak any faster. Dante asked themselves if there was something around there to resolve this. If the Chosen took a general sweeping look around the factory, a check happened. If successful, then after looking around and thinking for a moment, the Chosen noticed that the factory's machine was running at high speed. 2 hours of sleep might bring undue burden on other employees and may even have had negative effects on the factory's production lines. The owner noted this, and also the Chosen's keen eye for problems, telling his workers to stop making excuses and get back to work. The owner glares at the employee, who is slowly descending down the stairs before handing something over to them. He was going to give it out as a reward for good performance, but he wouldn't now. So they can have it. It was a silver watch case EGO gift, which deals 10% more damage to enemies that are attacked with attack skills that inflict tremor. And if it triggers Tremor Burst for the first time in a turn, it results in 2 more tremor counts, once per turn. If the check fails, then the employee would be fired for this. And the factory owner didn't look back as the former worker was on his knees sobbing. And the Chosen loses 15 SP because of this. And if one of the sinners takes a closer look at the factory owner and the employee, a check would be made, and if successful, then it's clear that they both have different hours. The factory owner could have around 80 hours a day, while it might seem like the worker had slept for 2 hours, but to the worker who had less time, it would be much less. When asked how much does he work for a day, the worker answered slowly, 5 hours. The factory owner then decided to let him off with a warning, advising that he be careful. The employee handed over the EGO gift faded watch case, which granted 1 more clash power if the enemy was faster, and grants more tremor to the target if that enemy was damaged. If the check failed, the factory owner didn't care if they had different names when this was pointed out, and decided to fire that worker on the spot. The previous case was due to not caring if it was for a few minutes or for a couple of hours. And the worker sobbed at this news, former worker, and got on his knees. The Chosen would be damaged by 15 SP because of this. Then, on the streets, they saw a number of people. They each had different times, acting slower or quicker, depending on what hours they had. It filled the streets with a disparity. 2 were looking at their watches and passed them by. 1 was a wealthy young man that was in a hurry, despite having a lot of time, and an old man entering the alley with a leisurely expression, even though he had little time. As for who they should follow, if it was the young man, a check happened, and if successful, the Chosen asked him, who was also able to catch up with them. Barely. Glancing at their watch, they told them that they had to work quickly so that they can have more time, as the factory owner lives 10 hours longer than him in a day. And the Chosen asked what he'd do with more time. The young man told them that he'd work more hours, and then told them that he had to go as he's running late, and ran to the building. He had all the time, and yet didn't know what to do with it all. And what was left was a rusty watch hand he geo-gift, where at the start of the first turn of a wave, the enemy with the highest speed would gain tremor, the amount being 9 minus the amount of speed. Along with half of that in tremor counts. Those with 12 or more tremor would deal 10% less damage at the start of each turn. If the check failed, they weren't able to catch up and nothing happened. If the old man was asked, a check happened, and if this was successful, the old man would smile kindly and would write something slowly. He told them that what's important is not how much time you have, it's about how you use that time. How could he have, a bad face at that good moment, when it's to do with walking slowly alone in that vast world? He then slowly turned around and started walking. He dropped something, but by the time it was picked up, he was no longer there. This was the etched clock hands Egeo gift, where at the first start of the wave, the first turn at the start of the wave, the enemy with the lowest speed would gain tremor by 9 minus the speed. At least 3, and at the start of the turn, 10% more damage would be dealt to those who had 12 or more tremor. If the check failed, the Chosen would be less patient with that old man to finish writing, and they'd leave. Nothing happened after that. If they decided not to follow either, it was clear that they were spending their time, and the damned dozen should stop chasing them and waste their own time. Nothing happened after that. Later, they encountered a victim that appeared to be frozen in time, a victim of the Time Ripper. He couldn't be touched due to being out of phase. Was there a way to help them? If one of the sinners was chosen to speak about this, a check was made. If successful, it was clear that there was no way that they could help them in any way. They were frozen in time and unable to be touched. But a receipt was found at the feet of the victim, a possible clue. This was the prepaid time receipt, which deals more damage based on if the enemy has 2 or more higher speed. So the damage increase that's given is calculated with this formula. 5 plus the speed difference times 2.5. The maximum amount of damage increase is 15%. And if the damage was dealt with an attack skill, the enemy target is bound by 2, and attack power is reduced by 1 on the next turn, once per turn. If the check fails, the same happens, but the time receipt isn't found. If choosing to ignore them, they decided to focus on the Time Ripper, deciding not to waste time on this. After eventually catching up to the Time Ripper, they finally cornered the distortion. But he wouldn't give up without a fight. The Time Ripper started off by utilizing his stolen time to recover from a broken part when the part does break, to gain protection from attacks, to make the enemy bleed more than they normally would, to hit harder, and when enough damage was taken, he also had an attack that was so quick that its target was unable to react quickly enough. Although it can miss if they're able to dodge quickly enough. Barely. Time can also be consumed to provide temporal acceleration, which also allows them to hit harder. He can also dodge attacks, which is only as good as the remaining amount of stolen time. So the less stolen time he had, the less effective it would be. Eventually, the Time Ripper was getting irritated by this battle. Another personality demanded a proper view. The core personality was hoping that he wouldn't have to show them his true form. Dante wasn't sure if it was truly multiple personalities or the voice of the many. There were several different pitches from everywhere in the room. Regardless, the Time Ripper had his back against the wall, so he grabbed the lapels of his long coat and Ryushu was on full alert at this move. He revealed his true form, which was multiple brains in jars, with the core personality being in a jar on the head, a possible holdover to his past with the Eredivier. The fight continued. His behavior at this point changed as the time now was shared between the different brains, which provided a bonus to attack damage and their defenses. They also had additional protection. Otherwise, not much changed with how they fought. Eventually, the Time Ripper was irritated by the tricks that the Damned Dozen were making. One of the personalities asked him if he remembered what he said earlier. It was possibly time to put that to good use. Another personality asked if that would use up too much time. Another shouted that it would drain too much from all of them. The core personality urged them to be calm and be silent, telling the others that letting this drag on for any longer would cost them more in the long term, believing that the attack that they'd used would surely eliminate them. Telling them to think of how much time they'd save by taking care of them now. They'll share the burden of time together. The Time Ripper then decided to do a do-or-die type of attack, where it was too fast for the target to react to, and it would be impossible to stagger him in that state. Although this consumed a lot of shared time, and on hit, at least in theory, it would boost speed and attack power, but yet, when the blade struck the target, nothing happened. The core personality didn't see how this could make sense. It had to work, seeing it as more tricks. Clearly unaware that their time was linked to Dante, and so they were immune from it. One of the others complained that he took 5 hours from him earlier, and taking another 3 hours just now. He only took 2 hours from the other sod. The core personality told them that they'd settle this as soon as the present threat is dealt with. They needed to focus on the battle. One of the other personalities questioned this, asking when? In 3 hours? 4? That fight had been going on for too bloody long. The core personality understood. This is why they must all sacrifice their collective time to... Another personality basically said, No! I'm not giving more than an hour of my time. Taking more from the rest, it makes more sense. Their personality got the short end of the stick last time when the numbers didn't evenly divide by 12. Another personality told them to shut up about the last time. They're just an uneducated fool who doesn't even understand basic addition and subtraction. The personality asked, "Who said that? It was the new one, wasn't it?" Dante understood that there was some infighting between the 12 personalities. Honglu understood this to mean exactly that. Now was their chance. So they exploited this weakness of the Time Ripper, and then the Time Ripper would no longer share time between the multiple brains, and this infighting was the undoing of this distortion. And then they were defeated. Next one will be the conclusion of this part of the lore series. Until next time, hail the rabbit!